I'm Kurt Wagner.
And I'm Mike Epley.
We're old college debate teammates who disagree about pretty much everything as often as possible.
In each episode, we examine a question inspired by the week's events.
Despite our disagreements, we're friends. We respect each other, we keep each other honest, and we have fun doing it.
And most importantly, we drink.
Offering a fresh, informed snapshot of the debates that dominate contemporary discourse, this is Right Brain, Left Brain.
Welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain, the champagne of podcasts. This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is brought to you by way of Mountain Dew, obviously.
And rum chata. Horchata con ron.
Ron. Oh, yeah. We bought the rum chata this week. I had never tried it. It's pretty good, although it's got the same alcohol by volume as wine, which I feel a little bit cheated.
Well, I mean, it's a scientific fact that it makes you less of a man.
Yeah.
To drink anything below an alcohol of 20% that's not a beer.
Yeah. And when it comes to gender science, I believe everything I read.
Well, see, that's my criticism of you. But anyways.
then we got the Kraken, of course, black spiced rum, which we'll probably get into. And, of course, also we got Crown Royal. We're just living our dream over here. And then the green stuff.
Mountain Dew, not to be confused with Mount Everest, where a lot of bougie rich people have died lately. But anyways.
The green stuff, not the green boots.
Yeah.
We made a green boots reference in last episode, and I had to cut it, unfortunately, but it was really funny. Do you remember that moment?
I do.
It was good.
But it got blurred with my wife is weirdly obsessed with this, and she made me watch that movie Everest with Jake Gyllenhaal and a bunch of other A-listers recently.
Green boots, man, is a really interesting thing to read about, like during class. I think it's when I read about it. It was like during some class in college. I spent like 45 minutes straight reading about green boots, and then I was like, "Oh, what's everyone talking about?" Uh-oh.
As opposed to post-college life, where you're stealing that same amount of time for useless internet searches from your boss.
From work, yeah. Hey, thank you to our listeners. We love you guys. You're the greatest. Our listens are looking really good, and for that, we say thank you for your bad taste.
And thank you for doubling down on your bad taste to our Patreon subscribers.
Yeah.
If you love Right Brain, Left Brain, and you want to ensure that we never leave you, show your affection, not infection. Show your affection by flinging us a couple bucks here and there. What would you give to the guy badgering you for money outside the grocery store? Consider giving that to us instead of a person in need. It'll be money much better and spent than on a person who has selfish personal needs. So go to patreon.com/RBLBpod, and Patreon is spelled Patreon in case you did not know.
In case you did not know, we want money.
Yes.
So what's going on in the world? Well, Donald Trump announced that he was going to tariff Mexico and that the tariffs would be increasing as long as Mexico keeps allowing people that are not from Mexico to enter the U.S. via Mexico.
Beto O'Rourke is polling lower than any other quote-unquote major Democratic candidate and is considered by many to be on his way out of the run for the presidency.
Yeah, he's doing local news, he's doing radio, he's doing whatever he can to try to get his numbers to go back up, but it does not seem good. He's declining into oblivion.
So on that note, hey, Beto, come on our show.
Yeah, come on our show before you're too obscure.
I'm calling you Beto instead of Robert because I want you to come on, Beto. I'm assuming you're listening, and for once I'm going to pretend like I'm not going to insult you. But you come on, I'm going to insult you. But come on our show, you might get one more person.
Man, if we had Beto O'Rourke on the show, you'd be so nice to him. Don't lie.
I would be very nice to him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't actually invite somebody on the show to be mean to them.
No, yeah, why would we?
I mean, I would beat him up in debate because he sucks. But anyways.
Robert Mueller held a press conference this week in which he re-emphasized his findings, where he also explained why he did not pursue indicting the president, which has been on a lot of people's minds, and where he also resigned, all in 9 minutes.
He sounded a lot like a college professor scolding his students for an in-class discussion where clearly nobody had done any of the reading.
Because nobody's read the Mueller report, right? Including a lot of politicians. Like, how is it possible that we have senators, like Congress people, media? Like, how's it possible
media
the president himself definitely hasn't read it?
Yeah, a lot of people, like an astonishing amount of media and political figures, like clearly haven't read it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read enough to know who's read it and who hasn't. Just like how...
Oh, man. Let's see what else. In the wake of a recent mass shooting that involved silencers or suppressors, as they're officially known, Right Brain Kurt told me today on the way to the grocery store that silencers are not designed so that the people getting shot can't hear it, but rather so that the person who's doing the shooting doesn't hurt their ears.
The president was asked Monday about suppressors and said, quote, "I don't like them at all," hinting at his flexibility towards breaking with conservatives again over gun control.
Yeah, this is the same guy who, to his credit, unilaterally banned bump stocks after the Las Vegas shooting.
It's worth noting that in the past, Donald Trump has expressed support for suppressors and gone out of his way to emphatically deny that he'd be willing to outlawing them. And Donald Trump Jr. was even paid to be in an ad for silencers in 2016.
Yeah, but Donald Trump Jr. is a piece of shit, so what are you going to do?
Well, we're also going to disagree about that. Anyways, this leads us for the topic of today because we're discussing the right to bear arms.
Wow. That means the right for every human to his own set of bear arms.
Yes. Well, it's also why you go to the gym so
you get bear arms.
Yeah, so that when you go sleeveless, people emphatically say, "Man, that guy's worked hard and he has the right to bear arms." This is funny to us, but to our English second language listeners in other countries, this is confusing as fuck. And all we're doing is muddying the waters. I feel like it's a conservative position to be afraid of spiders.
Call me Rush Limbaugh then, because I'm not into them.
Too many eyes, which means all they can see is big government. Too many arms for taking your taxes, which is theft.
Oh, man.
They're at least 6 times the thief that government is because they have 8 arms instead of just 2.
What even is this show? Hey, so back to the topic, the right to bear arms. So look, the Second Amendment, that's the one that guarantees the right to bear arms. The exact wording of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, if I can find it, is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
The U.S. has more gun violence than most industrialized nations. People obviously attribute the significance of this to politics. We have more common domestic violence and drug crime involving guns, as well as more mass shootings.
Yeah, in fact, we had a new shooting just this week in Virginia Beach. Some piece of shit killed 11 people with 2 legally owned pistols with extended magazines and sound suppressors.
Right, and as we said earlier, this event is already heating up the constant gun debate in our country, and since pistols were used in this attack, it doesn't fit the preferred media profile of mass shootings, namely that they're carried out with tactical rifles, usually AR-15s. This has many proponents of quote-unquote assault weapons bans unusually quiet, while a small but vocal group argues that this attack proves that banning assault rifles per se does not go far enough, demanding that we make efforts to reduce and even fully ban all firearms. This event brings into focus that when it comes to guns, we're a nation divided.
With the exception of the few people who do commit gun violence, nobody likes gun violence. Whether you stand on one extreme demanding that all arms be confiscated immediately, or you stand on the other extreme demanding that all arms be legalized immediately, you probably don't like gun violence, and you probably would like to find a way to reduce it. So how should we proceed with that?
At the federal level, at the state level, local, needless to say, battles are being fought at every level. But all these debates and the laws they create bow to the same master, the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
This creates a basic guarantee of gun rights at the federal level and stops the most effective local gun restrictions from taking effect.
Many attempts at different forms of gun control over many years have been atomized by the Eye of Sauron that is the Second Amendment.
So what do people do about that? Is it possible to meaningfully address gun violence in a way that doesn't violate these 27 words? An increasing number of Americans think that it is not.
In fact, a couple months ago, lawmakers in very gun-restrictive Hawaii proposed repealing the Second Amendment in its entirety. And they're not the first or biggest to have proposed it.
Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens wrote a New York Times op-ed in 2018 calling for repeal, arguing,
quote, in 2008, the Supreme Court overturned Chief Justice Burger's and others' long-settled understanding of the Second Amendment's limited reach by ruling in District of Columbia versus Heller that there was an individual right to bear arms. I was among the 4 dissenters, I being, of course, Stevens. To continue the quote, that decision, which I remain convinced was wrong, and clearly was debatable, has provided the NRA with a propaganda weapon of immense power. Overturning that decision via a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Second Amendment would be simple and would do more to weaken the NRA's ability to stymie legislative debate and block constructive gun control legislation than any other available option, end quote.
So is Stevens right? Is meaningful gun control impossible as long as the Second Amendment stands? About 21% of Americans. About 21% of Americans.
Why are you being so quiet?
I'm trying to be professional and shit.
Okay.
About 21% of Americans.
I'm going to have a heart attack. Go ahead.
About 21% of Americans seem to support repeal in a 2018 survey. This number is relatively small, and it's been steadily rising as frustration over quashed gun control measures grows nationally, according to some polls. Despite this, candidates supporting gun control have a hard time winning national office. Defenders of the Second Amendment say that the Second Amendment is critical to the preservation of liberty and preventing the imposition of tyranny.
And anybody that would nix the Second Amendment says that the state's rights to address gun violence is more important than the rights of militias, which are irrelevant to the security of a free state. So let's piece it out.
So that brings us for the resolution question of the day. Is it time to repeal the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution?
Repeal the Second Amendment? Well, I think, to quote Pete from Shaun of the Dead, you want to live like an animal? Go live in the shed, you thick fuck. In other words, you want to live in crazy gun town? Move to a crazy gun town state. The rest of us would like to live a relatively gun-free life.
And on the right, I say that you'll get my fucking gun from my cold, dead fucking hands.
Seems reasonable.
What? I'm sure there's plenty of room to debate that. So let's.
But first,
let's drink.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Woo. All right. I'm going to say now that I've tested it, I want to say rum chata makes a fantastic chaser. All right. Are you ready, listener? And are you ready, Right Brain Kurt?
I am.
In the words of a collegiate debater, is anyone not ready? Okay, so imagine a state where anyone over 21 can own all the guns they want, so long as they prove that they're responsible, safe, capable owners. There are waiting periods, there are extensive criminal background checks and mental health checks, and required gun safety and literacy courses in order to get licensed. Being licensed is required for ownership, and recurring registration fees exist, and there are rules about private trade that are designed to ensure that anybody in possession of a firearm is licensed and meets the requirements set by their community for gun ownership. If you qualify and you do your due diligence, you can own as many of whatever gun you want. In my mind, Left Brain Mike's mind, that is a middle road. I would want to live in that state, and if I didn't want to live there, I'd at least feel comfortable living in that state. But that state cannot exist in today's world, and the reason that state can't exist is because of the fucking Second Amendment. The Second Amendment does not do anything good. It is painfully vague, and it is horribly worded. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed, period. Who can take that seriously? Look at that horrendous grammar. It's not even a sentence. So what does it end up coming down to when you've got 9 people on a court trying to figure out how to interpret this clause? Usually it comes down to the partisan leanings of those 9 people on the Supreme Court. The Second Amendment is outdated, not just in its wording, but even more importantly, it is outdated in its intended purpose. I'm sorry, a well-regulated militia? What the fuck is a well-regulated militia? I have never seen a well-regulated militia. The ones that do exist are not well-regulated, and they don't do anything. There are 0 militias in existence that will protect me, you, Right Brain Kurt, or any of the people that we care about from a hostile U.S. government. None, 0, period.
Fake news.
No portion of the U.S. civilian population can defend itself against the United States Armed Forces, the most amazing fighting force that the world has ever seen. You think your 50 caliber, your 30 ARs, and your 75 pistols with extended mags and sound suppressors are going to keep you safe in a modern Civil War level crisis? They're not. In fact, your house is going to be your house is going to be among the first ones bombed by this fictitious tyrant who, by the beautiful design of other parts of our Constitution, wouldn't exist in this country anyway. Am I worried
That's
about...
why my guns are buried in a field half a mile from my house. Thank you very much. And by that I mean, don't tell the dictator.
Also, that's not even true. And the people for whom that is true are idiots. And would-be Emperor Trump proves it. I'd like to point out that the most strong-arm, constitution-dodging, power-concentrating president in American history is currently sitting in the Oval Office, eating Cheetos, and he's enjoying the support of gun nuts.
While listening to Right Brain, Left
While
Brain.
listening to Right Brain, Left Brain. So no, I don't remotely buy the "this here Smith & Wesson is to protect against tyranny" argument at all. Reasonable, popular gun control measures are thwarted by Second Amendment-based legal challenges, and we all suffer as a consequence, even gun rights advocates. After the Vegas shooting, most Americans, including pro-gun people, were like, duh, let's ban bump stocks. Even Donald Trump was like, okay, bump stocks banned. Boom. Cool. Case closed, right? No, not case closed. The NRA and other groups have been mounting legal challenges, hoping that, as with other popular regulations, that the bump stock ban will be nullified on Second Amendment grounds, despite what the people of this country want. Repeal is a conservative argument. Remember this. Repealing the Second Amendment makes government smaller. It improves and increases states' rights. It increases the rights of a state like Texas to loosen their regulations. Because the pressure from the outside and the pressure from gun control advocates would be relieved as they get to go live in states where they don't have to worry about people open carrying fucking ARs into Walmart. So come on, y'all, put your money where your conservative mouth is. You're into the states' rights? Well, be into the states' rights all the time. Support repealing the Second Amendment for the sake of your own claim that you want to own guns. And with that, I rest my case. And also with that, let's drink.
Okay.
Cheers. All right, I got a Slim Jim here, and I want you to finish your argument before I finish this Slim Jim.
All right, well, the Second Amendment is frequently criticized as outdated, but we wouldn't repeal the Third Amendment for being outdated either. And we've never had a problem with the quartering of soldiers in homes in the history of our country. We obviously recognize that even though we don't have a problem with our government trying to quarter soldiers in our homes in the status quo, it used to be so much of a problem from the governmental perspective when we were revising to make sure that we had a Bill of Rights held by individuals. They put it number 3 on the list of important things to make it clear that the government can't put soldiers in your homes. And we've enjoyed over 270 years of it. It's pretty clear to argue that we take it for granted. Mike, do you expect the government to knock on your door and tell you that, even though that's there and it's old and it's outdated, we're about to put a soldier in your house, you have to feed him and give him your bed and stuff? Do you expect that to happen?
Don't tread on me.
It's bad enough you have to have a veteran like Right Brain Kurt sleeping drunk on your couch and farting.
Don't tread on me.
By the same token, the tyranny that government could impose without guns to resist that tyranny is only kept in check by the provisions that the Bill of Rights makes. We know that this is true because of the people who did suffer tyranny in America after 1775, which is slaves. It's worth noting that the rights in the Constitution, according to case law and other horrendous rulings, did not apply to black people at all until black people like Harriet Tubman and David Walker used guns to assert their personhood, along with other historical events that led to the Civil War and the confirmation that, in fact, the rights in the Constitution also apply to everybody, no matter what your color of skin. But it's worth noting that until that was clear, slave owners had always denied guns to their slaves, knowing that a gun is all that it takes to make a slave someone who can assert their rights, whether denied to them lawfully or not. This proves that the Constitution absolutely can and will still exist and see a system where parts of the population and certain people are still deprived of their rights and their personhood and humanity unless they are allowed guns as a last defense to assert that personhood. And we can cross-apply and see how removing the Second Amendment would erode all other rights by taking out part of the intact Bill of Rights. If any single part of the Bill of Rights can be taken away, then any of it can. And that's why we've never repealed the Third Amendment, even though we have money for barracks to put, our troops in and all that stuff. But to further extend that argument, just like we can't get rid of our fundamental national right to free speech and then realistically hope to see it enforced, the same thing goes with repealing the Second Amendment. I find it incredibly funny that the same political party in the same side of the political aisle that is telling us that if there is any restriction on abortion anywhere in the country, even though it's not explicitly named as a right in the Constitution, that it will threaten that right everywhere from coast to coast, and they ignore how their own proposals prove that they would immediately pass a law outlawing every single gun in existence at the federal level without the Second Amendment. Our friends on the left only pretend that they wouldn't ban every single gun when they need to for rhetorically dishonest exercises like the one that Mike is engaging in right now. I love the guy, But Mike would fully support and go along with any federal effort to ban and confiscate every single gun in the country, coast to coast. And even if he didn't morally support that, if enough liberals were in power at the federal level, he wouldn't fight and stop it. And that's the thing that you need to realize about our friends on the left who try to offer you this silver tongue shifting narrative based off of whatever sounds convenient at the time to try to sell a lie about guns, right?
From my cold dead hands.
It would never it would never stop at quote unquote so-called common sense gun laws, because no government ever has stopped at that level before eventually sliding into an eventual near or total ban. Mike's responsible gun world already exists. Most of the hundreds of millions of gun owners are responsible when you consider that there's more guns than people in this country, and that somewhere between a third to half of the country is armed. Efforts to extend control and create these idyllic situations in the status quo already also prove this. Like, for example, the issuance of concealed carry permits here in California is much more restrictive than it is in Texas, and the criteria by which people in California government issue concealed carry licenses fits Mike's criteria, where they have to prove that they're safe, responsible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at the actual number of people in California who get issued concealed carry licenses, it's literally only the people who donate politically to their local sheriff, and that sheriff gets to say, oh, okay, my friends can have concealed carries and nobody else can. A poor person who's not politically connected in California cannot get a concealed carry license the way that they can in Texas, where that right is just given as a basic right for being a Texan who has a Second Amendment right. Most so-called common sense gun laws are based on total misunderstandings of how guns work. These bans always place a burden on average gun owners while having no efficacy on stopping gun violence. That's why in the status quo, courts have ruled in the favor of gun control that is good, like the existing ban on bump stocks. It's been fought at a couple different levels, and every court so far has ultimately upheld that bans on bump stocks are legal because bump stocks actually alter the weapon and impact the lethality. And the last legally owned one was surrendered to law enforcement after a court ruled that that was how it had to go. So that's my defense of the Second Amendment in the status quo. And I'm sure that Mike's agreed with me, and we're about to sing Kumbaya and then shoot guns into the air where the bullets can never come down and hurt anybody.
You need powerful enough guns that they break through the stratosphere and fly into space and penetrate.
Angels.
I was going to say satellites. Angels. All right. Yeah, no, I got some things to say, but let's drink.
Okay.
All right, so I got a couple bones to pick with the arguments that Kurt made. The first thing I want to do is extend my arguments about the solvency of repealing the Second Amendment for when it comes to allowing states like Hawaii or California to pass the gun control measures that they see fit in their states, while also still allowing states like Texas or Arizona to have whatever kind of permissive gun laws they want to have. There's nothing in repealing the Second Amendment that necessarily tells a state like Texas or Arizona that they can't not have any gun laws if they want.
Nothing except enough liberals in the legislature and White House to make that permanent binding law.
But here's the thing.
And then you guys continue to flood the polls with illegal immigrants that are in the pool for you, and then all of a sudden you've got everything you need forever.
Right. Well,
I thought you were gonna laugh at that.
Sorry, I was too deeply. I was too deep in debate world.
Like, yeah, illegal immigrants. Everybody knows that we weaponize them to vote for us.
Oh shit! Wait, say it again. I wasn't even listening. I was just waiting. I had the perfect answer. I was just waiting. I didn't hear the illegal immigrant argument. Once we get enough illegal immigrants in the legislature, was that your argument?
No, but that could be my argument too.
Does it seem like a good argument? I mean, I'm open to it.
Do people like it? Let's check Twitter.
What we have to do is we have to look at this from a perspective of like, okay, say we were to repeal the Second Amendment, what would be likely to happen, right? Kurt's arguing, and I think it's a fair argument. He's drawing this argument that if we get rid of the Second Amendment, then the minute that we get a liberal-controlled legislature, that they're going to just go ahead and ban guns across the country. And then so much for my argument about states' rights, and like, wasn't I planting it that way to begin with? But
because I have to admit that a lot of the gun crime that happens in blue states is because it's guns that are bought in red states where laws are more liberal. And that's one of the best points that you guys make in your face. I don't want to give you too much credit, but that's true.
And recently there's actually a case that's currently in court about New York City, passing a law that says that any guns legally owned in New York City cannot pass outside of city lines. And that's being challenged on a Second Amendment basis, right? So it speaks exactly what you're talking about. Interstate and even intercity gun transport is a real issue that's being dealt with on the local and state level very much, right? And people are trying to even deal with it on the national level, but those are such complex cases because of the Second Amendment. My whole thing is like, if we get rid of the Second Amendment, then a city like New York can say you can't take your New York City guns outside of New York City, right? In my mind, I think that's helpful. And I think that's helpful to gun owners in Texas. And the reason I think it's helpful to them is because it's not like it has to be done nationally or not at all debate anymore in a world without the Second Amendment. In my mind, it's a state-to-state issue because right now, when someone wants to ban assault weapons, they're like, well, we got to do it nationally. But I think, why don't we just have states where assault weapons are allowed and states where assault weapons aren't allowed?
It's worth noting that we already have assault weapons bans in most blue states. And
I don't know about most, but certainly California.
California, thank you, fucking Kamala Harris.
Let me lay it all on the table for you. I'm not kidding when I say that I actually do believe in gun ownership on the individual level. I want for me to feel confident that every gun owner is a safe, like responsible, reliable person who's been vetted as such. Like that's what I want. And I think actually a lot of conservatives are with me on that. I think conservatives are really pissed off when people with like major issues, people who have a history of domestic violence, for example, when they get a hold of guns, I think conservatives are furious about it. Right?
We are. And this is why people like us push solutions like fix NICS.
Right.
And I would say that one of the areas of disagreement that I have with you is that because there's some areas where I'm like a capital R Republican, but then there's areas where I'm a capital R L Libertarian. And here's all I want. I just want to go on a cross-country road trip where I can bring a pound of marijuana, my pistol, and then maybe if me and my wife are feeling squirrely along the way, we can stop off for an abortion anywhere in the country.
That is highly libertarian. I mean, I hear you there. One of the arguments against high contrast from state to state in terms of laws is like, this is supposed to be a country where you can travel back and forth freely. And like you move from one state to another and all of a sudden you can no longer have a dildo in your butt or you're going to go to jail. You know what I mean? Like
this is a serious concern.
This is a serious concern. Why are we debating the Second Amendment? So I understand that concern, but that being said, like, well,
the
I don't know.
CDL, concealed dildo license.
CDL, yeah. But speaking of licenses, when it comes to licensing, right? One of the reasons that licenses for owning guns are not more popular in different states is because it's thought that it would not be constitutional to say you have to jump through these 10 hoops in order to be qualified to own a gun. To say that a person doesn't intrinsically already have a right to own a gun without getting licensed is unconstitutional in the status quo because it's a violation of the person's right to bear arms. I want a world where a state at least can say you got to be licensed. That if we were to give the states that have the people that care about gun control the right to enforce gun control, that it would alleviate a lot of the pressure that's happening at the national level. That's my argument.
So I really like that argument. There's some things I wanted to say that were kind of in agreement with you, like about how I think that in California, right, like it's not a federal requirement that you take an exam about the basic safety use of a gun. I don't actually mind that. I don't know how I'd feel about that being imposed at a national level, but I do just want to state for the record, because it's an interesting part of this debate, that I have no problem with California making me take that. And I don't even know, I would at least be willing to talk to my friends on the left about that being a national requirement. I'd even be willing to make it, we've talked about this privately, but I'm willing to say it on air too, because if you go to a shooting range, right? Any of our listeners who's been to a shooting range, they have somebody there who can give you lessons for a fee. And even if you're not taking lessons, there's still a person there who's like a guided expert that like says, as soon as he sees unsafe gun behavior, he starts like saying, hey, don't point that this way. Like, don't point it towards the firing line. Don't point it at another person. And I know I break with other conservatives when I say this. I don't necessarily even have a problem with that being more rigorous at the state level, where you have to take a hands-on course with a person who intimately teaches you firearm safety. I certainly don't have a problem with that at the state level. I'd be willing to talk about it at the federal level, especially if we could couple that with some sort of other liberalization. But I don't want to get too far ahead to common ground, because we're still here to debate about
And I think it's great that you're extending the olive branch that far, because that's not even anything I would be asking for. I mean, would I be happy about nationalizing a licensing requirement? Would I be happy about nationalizing approaching guns as seriously as we approach vehicles, right? Yes, of course I would. That being said, I would be more than satisfied with state to state requirements being what, you know what I mean? Like being able to be determined by the needs of that locality or that state, right?
And one of the things that we've discussed privately before, but maybe not on air, is that I will frequently say that if you go anywhere in the world and then go anywhere across this country, we still do relatively well compared to world standards of drivers. And yet at the same time, I would love to see drivers across this country be a lot fucking better. And that I would not be against every state in the union, especially now that there's stuff like rideshare, to make it harder to own a driver's license or a car, although there's all kinds of court cases and other obstacles legally and legislatively and in the courts that would stop you from necessarily going there A to B in terms of raw fiat. But before I agree with you again too much, let me push back on you and counter some of the points you made before we sort of try to bring this home to areas where we agree.
I'll accept that, but I want to drink first.
I accept a drink.
Cheers.
Cheers, sir.
To guns.
And
may they forever rest in hell. Hell, nice gun lockers. Man, you know who really influenced me when it comes to guns away from being super pro gun control? My friend James, who's a debate student of mine. Fantastic guy. His grandparents were communist revolutionaries.